This may be sacrilegious to say, but on my very first playthrough of Bloodborne, I hated it. Like, I really, really didn't like it. I knew there was so much praise for the game, and I dabbled in a bit of Dark Souls previously, so I had a slight idea of what I was getting into. I knew the story enraptured so many people, so I wanted to know what all the fuss was about. So I borrowed the game from my friend, fired it up, died probably 200 times, rage quit so many times until I got to Yahar'gul, the unseen village, and that's what killed it for me. See, there were these bell ladies that could infinitely regenerate enemies, and there was a huge difficulty spike because every enemy did so much more damage there than before, and nothing there gave much experience, so I was stuck in like a frustrating rut that caused me to give up because it just wasn't fun anymore. So I mulled it over for 6 months, took a break, and noticed that the Game of the Year edition of Bloodborne was on sale for $20 on the PSN store. I decided, hey, maybe I can do it this time. I have a fresh outlook on Bloodborne, my mind is clear, I know how to deal with the frustrating parts now, I can do this. So, after watching some lore videos to find out what's actually going on in the game, I purchased it, and it became my very first Platinum trophy on PS4. So, what made Bloodborne my first ever completion? What made me want to finish all of it, as opposed to my frustrating slog that sullied my view of this game initially? How could I have done such a huge 180? Well, okay, this is incredibly petty, but I picked the saw cleaver instead of the hunter's axe. Yes, a single weapon change allowed me to 100% an RPG and spend 50 plus hours on it. It turns out that the hunter axe did not fit my playstyle at all. See, Bloodborne has phenomenal combat. It has delicately crafted animations for the player and enemies so any playstyle can be viable. The problem is the hunter's axe was a slower, more zoning weapon. It could keep enemies at bay, and it was only meant for 1 or 2 strikes before you roll back and recuperate your stamina. It meant to hit hard and infrequently. See, when it comes to combat in any action game, I'm a complete offense lunatic. I have almost no patience and I just go in on enemies. Now, in Bloodborne, this doesn't quite work as well unless you have a quick weapon to complement your playstyle. So, I picked the saw cleaver, ran through it the entire game, and I enjoyed it a lot more. But there's obviously more to my enjoyment than a single weapon change. As said earlier, Bloodborne is a phenomenal game. You just have to learn to embrace its oddities. The Dark Souls / Bloodborne series always had combat that I was unfamiliar with. I was always a player of Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, which were quick, responsive, stylish action games. Bloodborne's combat is different than that. It's more grittier, it's more deliberate, and it has much higher risk and reward. I don't think I'd quite equate the combat of Bloodborne to a game of chess, as chess requires you to read a human opponent's thoughts, but Bloodborne puts a huge emphasis on understanding enemy movements and reactions to your movements. I'm going to try and illustrate a combat scenario to better enhance my point. You could walk in front of a boss, and they could swing at you. So, to dodge that swing, you roll behind, and start swinging at the boss with your saw cleaver. However, the bosses in Bloodborne are smart, and have a swift retaliation to your swings from the back. So you take some damage from that, not too much, and you internalize that knowledge. Now, you can still roll behind and swing. However, you know when to limit yourself now. You don't push yourself too far. You take a few swings, dodge the back swipe, and continue an assault on their front. It becomes a sort of ballet between you and your opponent. Unless you have the saw cleaver, and then you can just stunlock your opponents without having to think, seriously, why is this weapon so good for being a starting weapon? Another great thing about Bloodborne's combat is the rally system. See, when you take damage, you don't immediately lose your life. It becomes life that can be regenerated through attacks. So, to complement my insanity with the saw cleaver, there was the rally system that encouraged offense. See, I wasn't a huge fan of Dark Souls' combat, which again is probably sacrilegious to say. I thought it was kind of clunky, and I think it focused on defense a little too much. The problem isn't with the game though, it's with me. It just didn't suit me, so I didn't really enjoy it. It's still a fantastic game, but it's just not my flavor. But Bloodborne lets you go hard and go hard frequently. With every swing, there is satisfying feedback. There's usually a large blood splatter, a gushing sound effect, and it makes you want to keep swinging. It makes you want to just hit, and hit more. And that is brilliant. Not because I sounded like a serial killer, and if my mom watches this, she'll probably think video games are evil. It's because that feeling of wanting to keep attacking and keep swinging at your opponents is relevant to the game's story. I'll go a little more in depth with this later, but in Bloodborne, you play as a hunter. The biggest duty of the hunter is to hunt beasts. Hunters become so addicted to killing monsters and beasts that the line between them and other monsters is blurred. They become so infatuated with the hunt that they turn on their fellow humans. Everything to them as a target. Now, this level of insanity doesn't happen to your character in the game, but the rally system is a fantastic gameplay mechanic that complements offensive playstyles, but also reflects the game's narrative. The game doesn't make it a point to shove it in your face how clever this system is. It's very subtle, and it's one of those things that, as you think about it more, makes the game better. And Bloodborne is full of moments like that. You'll be walking around in real life, thinking about whatever, and then Bloodborne crosses your mind. And you start thinking, man, that game is so gratifying and addicting. But then you think about it more. You think about some tiny detail in the game world, and it always enhances your appreciation of the game. Bloodborne is a game that gets better with thought, and I think that's the mark of something truly special. So you thought I was done talking about the combat, didn't you? Nope, not at all. Combat is Bloodborne's meat and potatoes, so it gets the most gushing from me. Bloodborne has a lot of weapons, and they all have different movesets and properties. You have generic swords and axes, but you also have a sword that splits into two, and the arm of a god as a weapon. There are so many weapons to fit any playstyle that it's actually incredible that so much effort went into it. But what makes the combat so strong is how simple yet varied it can all be. Bloodborne doesn't have the fancy combos of Bayonetta or the complicated inputs of Street Fighter. You have a light attack, a charge attack, a dash attack, a jump attack, a heavy attack, and a rolling attack. Most combat is done through R1, R2, or L2 on the PS4 controller. 3 attack buttons. Super simple. However, like Super Smash Bros., the actions of each weapon are different for each button. See, in Smash Bros., every character has the same inputs the player has to do, but the result on screen is different. Bloodborne is just like that. One weapon's R1 attack could be a horizontal swing, but another's could be a stab. One playstyle prioritizes swinging at a group of enemies or body parts, while the other emphasizes safety and poking. These are two very different necessities all in one button. Once you learn Bloodborne's controls in an hour, you can use any weapon in any playstyle. A problem I had with games like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry is you get new weapons like halfway through the game, and they have properties or movesets that you need to upgrade and learn, and more often than not, it's just not viable. You usually end up sticking with your starting weapon because you feel the most comfortable with that. But Bloodborne's experimentation is low cost, because each weapon is viable. You just need to learn how to use it. However, I will say that Bloodborne is guilty from that upgrading sync problem. If you fully upgrade the saw cleaver, you aren't gonna spend your rare upgrade points on something you might not end up using because it doesn't scale with your stats. Another thing I really didn't like about Bloodborne was the initial tutorial. See, you get all the controls in a single area, and if you're a new player, it's probably just going to fly all over your head. In the original Dark Souls, you go through the game slowly at the beginning to learn every bit of the controls so you know the exact situation in which to apply them. Bloodborne doesn't do that. It just shoves it in your face and expects you to get it. And that's a problem to newer players. There's a bunch of other technicalities to gameplay as well, like builds surrounding specific weapons, stat scaling, but I won't bore you with the statistics. But with the combat, I just wanted to emphasize how great the core of this game is before going into other aspects. So yeah, Bloodborne's combat, fantastic. Bloodborne is probably the prettiest game I have ever seen. It isn't just because of its graphical fidelity, but also because of its aesthetic. The Victorian Gothic look isn't something you see very often in games, and the usage of striking, beautiful skies, decrepit architecture, pointed black fences, and ostentatious colors makes the game an absolute feast for the eyes. Everything is handcrafted and beautifully put in place. There are visual cues everywhere, and each area is believably interconnected. I like the choice to set the game in a single city as well. It makes exploring new areas believable because they're so close and small to one another. In RPGs like Final Fantasy VII, I find it hard to believe that I can go around the entire world in 1 minute if I keep flying in my airship. Bloodborne avoids that problem by containing itself to locations that can be accessed by walking. Yharnam is an intricate city that has been plagued by the hunt. The pompous imagery shows decadence and hedonism, which is fitting for the literary aesthetic this game is going for, and the city of Yharnam itself. Yharnamites are suspicious of outsiders because they have pride. They have pride that their city carries the miracle cure, and that they're better than the rest of the world. So again, like the combat, all of this imagery is world building and visually striking at the same time. It seamlessly hits both categories. But the real kicker for the visuals are the gravestones. Seriously, there are so many gravestones. Sometimes they stick into each other like this crystal mass of gravestones. And it's kind of weird. Like, How does anybody get anywhere in this town when there are gravestones everywhere? Carriages can't go anywhere. There's probably mad traffic. It would probably be a nightmare. Oh yeah, there's also a plague that turns people into beasts and makes this town inhabitable anyway, so I guess that's a bigger issue, but whatever, man. Anyways, visuals in Bloodborne, also fantastic. So Bloodborne, like the rest of the Soul series, is intentionally vague with its story. You're often given very few direct answers from NPCs on what exactly is going on, so you, the player, have to piece the story together through item descriptions, notes strewn around the world, and visual cues. But again, most of this stuff is incredibly ambiguous. I could be walking around, slicing people up, and then I read a note that says, "Madmen toil surreptitiously in rituals to beckon the moon. Uncover their secrets." And I just say to myself, yeah, alright, sure, you're the boss game, whatever you say, man. You can pretty much run through Bloodborne without talking to an NPC or understanding the story. And you might say, well, that sounds weird. Why would you play a game that you can't even understand? And to that I say, have you seen what NPCs in this game say? When you run up to an NPC who's actually eager to exfoliate details about Yharnam, they're just as bad as the notes. They say stuff like, "Ah, the blood of the undying blood hunters sapped the soul of the goddess Yharnam. The haunted ashen blood took her sanity and left behind decrepit ruins." Fuck. Oh, God. Shit. And again to that, I say, alright, man. Sure, whatever you say, dude. This ambiguity, though, is another reason I just gave up on the game on my first go. I had no idea what was going on, and it felt like the game expected me to have it all figured out. I was confused and frustrated with the lack of answers, and I wanted a reason for all this hunting and killing. And that is what Bloodborne wants you to feel. Bloodborne wants you to be confused about the world. I mean, why wouldn't you be? You get thrown into this hunt as a hunter against your will, and now you have to kill a bunch of humans and monsters because some random dude in a wheelchair tells you to? Who wouldn't be confused by that? Couple that with the fact that, oh, spoilers by the way, there are apparently cosmic gods roaming and lurking in the world, and nobody can notice them unless they're woke enough? Yeah, I'd be confused as well. But it's only through player exploration and note reading that some answers become known. The player has to go out of their way to gain insight into the world. Knowing more doesn't change the outcome of the game, but it does change your perspective on everything. Lines of dialogue gain new meaning, and the world looks more terrifying than it already did initially. The more woke you are, the more interesting and terrifying your experience becomes. It heightens the game, but it also makes you more crazy for thinking about it. Which leads me into the last point. Usually action games aren't scary. They employ scary-looking creatures, but you can always crush them with some ridiculous weapon. They generally aren't a threat. The monsters in Bloodborne are similar to this, but Bloodborne strikes a particular horror. Cosmic horror. The fear of the unknown. The fear of actually knowing the truth to the world. The phrase, "ignorance is bliss," applies very heavily to Bloodborne. The more you know about these gods and their control over the world, and how ultimately futile your actions are to combat them ruining humanity, that's scary. You can run through Bloodborne, chop enemies up, and then just beat the game and go, huh, that was alright, I guess. It was pretty fun and satisfying to crush all those hard bosses. But looking at Bloodborne with a critical eye, allowing yourself to become enveloped in its atmosphere and world are its greatest strengths. Bloodborne isn't scary because of big, spoopy monsters. Bloodborne is scary because of how powerless you are to truly stop anything. Despite your adventures, despite you uncovering so much of the world and progressing as a hunter, it's ultimately meaningless. You're a pawn in a bigger operation, and you can never be more than that, unless you get the secret ending and become a god, but that's besides the point. So Bloodborne went from one of my most frustrating experiences to one of the best I've had in years. I learned to take it slowly and absorb every detail. I learned my playstyle and found weapons that complemented it. I took in the imagery and played more patiently and smart. I enjoyed it so much more. I haven't had this big of a 180 on a game ever, and if you haven't seen the millions of other people recommending this game, it's got my seal of approval. Because my seal of approval totally matters, right guys? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. I hope I was able to show you why this game is one of my favorites in recent memory and why it was my very first platinum trophy. If you enjoyed this review, please subscribe. I make content about video games that are analyses, reviews, and editorials. My channel is centered solely on video games, and even though I've only gained 20 subscribers in 2 weeks, seeing that kind of growth and support on my content just warms my heart. To see this channel grow and become something large would be a dream come true. Thanks again so much, and you viewers, you guys, you mean the world to me. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and stay woke.